we had all danced with the devil.
As American troops advanced into Italy in June 1944, they encountered thousands of displaced persons who had fled to the relative safety of Italy to avoid capture by Hitler's army. Some were sick and starving, many were separated from their families, and most had been on the run or in hiding for years. Caught between increasing evidence of Nazi atrocities in Europe and strong isolationist sentiment at home, President Franklin Roosevelt decided to circumvent strict U.S. immigration quotas and allow a small group into the country as his guests, without legal status. On June 12, 1944, FDR sent a message to Congress that 1,000 refugees would be brought to a temporary haven at Fort Ontario in Oswego, New York. In Italy, 3,000 people applied for the program to come to America. The 982 who were ultimately selected came from 18 countries overrun by Hitler, the largest number from Yugoslavia. And while almost 90% were Jewish, the group also included those of Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Protestant faiths. Accompanying the refugees on their journey would be Ruth Gruber, Special Assistant to Interior Department Secretary Harold Ickes.
So the first criteria was concentration camp survivors. Then try to find people who could run a camp, because the government would give them shelter and food, but they didn't want to have to send people in to do all the housekeeping of running a camp.
First fortified by the British in 1755, the 80-acre army camp on the shores of Lake Ontario had been closed only 3 months earlier. Under Director Joseph Smart, the camp would provide adequate facilities to feed and house the refugees. Many refugees were delighted by the enthusiastic reception given them upon their arrival. But to others, their first sight of Fort Ontario was one of shock and dismay.
But when we got to the camp, the train pulled up right to the entrance to the camp with the gate. And all you saw was this gate, this fence with barbed wire. For them, they were right back in Dachau.
Wearing identification labels improvised for them in New York, the refugees arrived in Oswego tagged as U.S. Army casual baggage. Military intelligence officers, translators, and social workers began the lengthy process of registration, administering food and medical attention, and providing each family with their own sparsely furnished barracks. Jewish and Christian organizations, as well as secular agencies, would fill other needs, donating clothing, toys, curtains, cribs, kosher provisions, and the services of English teachers. For security and health reasons, the refugees would be under strict quarantine for 30 days. No one, except for officials, would be allowed in or out, even those with American relatives. The fence became a daily symbol of the barrier between the refugees and their new lives. In a show of her concern and support, Eleanor Roosevelt visited Fort Ontario shortly after the quarantine was lifted. She assured the group that she would do all she could to help them remain in the United States. And yet, the fate of the refugees remained uncertain. After Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945, the government struggled to find a sensible solution to their plight. As many refugees petitioned to remain in the United States, Congress conducted special hearings, and newspaper editorials championed their cause. But with FDR's recent death, many government officials believe that President Truman was obligated to uphold his predecessor's agreement to send the refugees home after the war.
Before they got on the ship, every one of them had, except the children, sign a paper that when the war ended, they would go back to Europe. So when the war ended, the State Department, the Justice Department especially, and even the Treasury Department, all said they must go back.
On December 22, 1945, after 17 months of confinement and more than 7 months after Germany had surrendered, the refugees finally had their answer. President Truman declared that the existing immigration quotas would not change, but within the limits of those quotas, the Oswego refugees were to be given first consideration for citizenship. Over 70 communities across the United States issued special invitations to the refugees, and social workers helped them choose their future homes. In the more than 50 years since they first arrived on the shores of Lake Ontario, this band of refugees from 18 different countries and from all walks of life have served as poignant testimony to the power of hope and of the American dream. From this group of 1,000 have come an unparalleled number of doctors and dentists, psychologists, college professors, scientists, artists and photographers, film directors, singers and composers, teachers, lawyers, engineers, hospital directors, architects and business owners, pioneers in medicine, science, and art, who, against incredible odds, have repaid their adopted country many times over with their contributions.
This is a great success story. This is a story about America, the land of opportunity, which opened its doors. The doors had to be pushed and shoved a little bit, but the doors did open in 1945. We were allowed to stay, and it's a society and an environment which allowed people to fulfill their potential.
You live your life as an American. I live my life as an American, and then all of a sudden one day you stop and remember where your roots are, where you came from, what your history was, what your background is, and how much you owe to the people who helped you along the way, because so many people didn't make it. And it was either a belief in God and a belief in luck, or a belief in the people who helped you and saved your life.
1,000 people, a little short of 1,000, came in and did well, worked hard, struggled, but made something of themselves, and that's a story worth telling.